Our latest PRSA virtual program. I'm Amanda Lestraff, your PRSA Nebraska chapter president. We're pleased to be offering today's programming virtually as we do our part to keep the community safe and healthy. For the indefinite future, all of our program will continue to be offered virtually as we practice an abundance of caution with health and safety of our members as our top priority. As a statewide chapter, it's also really important to us that we get to reach our entire state with these virtual programs as well. So a little plus there as well. We actually have another exciting virtual program next month that I'll also talk about in a minute. But first, with all of our events, I have a few brief announcements. You're probably familiar with Zoom at this point, but just in case, we do ask that you put yourself on mute during the presentation. We've also found traction, and most of us have the video off during the presentation. And then as you're ready to ask questions, you're welcome to unmute and turn your video on and or chime in via chat. Either way is great. We'll have Erin monitoring the chat to ask questions as well. We want to extend a very special welcome to any guests today. It's a great time to join PRSA. If you use the code CHAPTER 2020 when you register online, you'll actually get a free one-year chapter membership, and your initiation or reinstatement fee is waived. So we invite you to head over to prsa.org to join. Do you represent a nonprofit looking for PR support in 2020? PRSA Nebraska can help. Each year, our chapter offers PR expertise to local nonprofits seeking assistance with communication strategy, media pitches, social media assistance, and much more. You'll find more information at prsanebraska.org/volunteer. The deadline for that is Monday, August 17th. Another opportunity upcoming is our 2021 PRSA Nebraska Board of Directors. Nominations are currently open, and you'll find all the information also on our website. That's again prsanebraska.org, and the deadline for that is September 11th. Next, I'd like to thank our chapter sponsors: Woodman Life, Omaha Steaks, Bergman Incentives, Lucas Partners, M-Space and Lovegren, and Envoy Inc. Our sponsors help with our programming like today's event. They help fund our scholarships and a whole lot more. There are a ton of benefits to becoming a sponsor of our chapter. I'd invite you to email me or Kathy Bernecki if you're interested in sponsoring our chapter. We want to give a special shout out today to M-Space and Lovegren for sponsoring today's program so that everyone could attend for free. Thank you, M-Space and Lovegren. As I mentioned earlier, we hope you'll join us next month on Tuesday, September 15th, right here in the comfort of your own home. We'll hear from Jemelyn Griffin, a professor from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, about social media, ethics, and the PR landscape. September is Ethics Month, so we hope you'll join us for this special program about this important topic. One more thing, feel free to tweet during the program, and please use hashtag PRSANE. And with that, we'll get on with our program. We're honored to have DeJuan Lamont Hayes from Noise Omaha share his expertise and perspective on creating a more just world through content and storytelling. I'll turn it over to you, DeJuan.
Good morning, everybody, or afternoon. My name is DeJuan Lamont Hayes. I am the founder director of Noise, which is North Omaha Information for Everyone. We are a community-led news initiative based here in North Omaha, committed to addressing the information gaps and disparities and utilizing technology and modern tools, as well as some of the traditional tools of journalism to really aid in storytelling and working with the community. People have power, it's just really helping them see it. And so there are a lot of elements to doing that. I am a Creighton alum. I went to the Journalism School of Media and Computing and graduated in 2016 with a focus in public relations. And in that time, I learned a lot, especially about the multiple ways and the many ways of communication that are available to us, especially through technology, and that photo, video, design, advertising, press releases, but also just direct engagement and being present is really important. So I have a presentation that's kind of a mix of things. At the front, I kind of talk about some of the design choices I made for Noise, and then it moves into what really informs like our decision making and what informed our inception, and then some examples of photography and different elements. I'll kind of move through them pretty quickly and then jump back for us to be able to have a direct conversation and chat and things. But I thought it was important to share some of this, like the secret sauce, because really it is like a mix of, you know, of design choices and fonts, as well as it being informed by studies and then some really simple questions that you ask. And so I'm going to start my presentation. Here. Shoot. Okay. Oop. Start at the beginning. Sweet. So my background and what you see at the start of here is actually a wonderful mural off of 24th and Ohio Street. The North 24th Street corridor is a historic heart of North Omaha, and this mural was commissioned supported by the Union for Contemporary Art and painted by Reggie LaFleur, who's a North Omaha native, is based out of Minneapolis. It's called The Seed, the Ancestor, the Prophet, and the Seed. So NOISE is North Omaha Information Support Everyone. How I like to explain it is North Omaha is our context, information is our service, and support everyone is our goal. These are some of the visual inspirations for the design of NOISE, as well as, you know, direct references to really the ethos or what it's grounded in. Really being rooted in arts, community, and culture, you know, civics and any engagement, really being present, and then putting that strong visual language forward when you're trying to, when you have a strong mission like addressing addressing information disparities and putting the power back into the hands of people. Here are some visual representations of that. These are some of the fonts that we choose if you're interested or are curious as to what it was. Very specifically though, I searched for something that was bold, that was able to stand on its own, and that was able to convey the very message of NOISE and being clear through that. Nor'Wester is our second font. It's a great one if you're interested. This is some secondary branding that we've explored for a series that we're called Making Noise, where it's much more community oriented. And if you were to go on our Instagram, you would see a video from Miss Felicia Webster doing celebrations and just being like, hey, a shout out. And so this is some secondary branding that we've done. So this kind of starts into the presentation itself. When we were first founded in 2018, actually, let me see if I can find it. There was a thing called an information ecosystem assessment conducted in the summer of 2017. And two journalists came to town from Listening Post Collective, Jesse Hardman and Burgess Brown. And the goal of it here is to talk with residents and about news and information. Where do you hear things? Where does it come from? What are the media outlets that are available? What's the legacy of media here? And then what are the social conditions that might affect or impact people's access to information? At that time, I was the communications manager at the Union for Contemporary Art, and I had just graduated college the year before and was really excited to come back to North Omaha. It's where I've grown up, it's where my family is from. I lived in different parts of the city, and at that time, I was able to contribute to this information ecosystem assessment as a communications manager, but then also as a community member. And this full report is available on our website. If you just go to the bottom and you'll find North O report. I can also share it with the PRSA team and they can distribute it out to you guys. It's a great document. I think it's a really strong assessment format that just shows like, well, here's what happens when you are able to if you step into a community and just listen and observe and take as many notes as you can, take as much research, and then try to bring it together and just like, here's what we heard. Did we hear that correctly? And there was lots of communication with myself and other people that were a part of the assessment, just being like, did we hear that right? Is this clear? And so ultimately what was really, what came from this is that the Whites Family Foundation was kind enough and loved this assessment so much that they were willing to put $25,000 behind something to use this report, but it had to be from the community, and it had to be, and it had to incorporate some of the elements of the report. And I was in the convenient position to be like, I'm willing to quit my job to start something. And people were like, what? And so I was willing to take that step. And so in January 2018, I left the union and then began a formal proposal process that then culminated into Noise, which comes back to these things. What is North Omaha? Which is a great question. And it's this graphic, the What is North Omaha, we actually used it in our very first print edition that we did in collaboration with the Omaha Star, and is a question that I just started sharing in North Omaha Facebook groups and with people, and it's something I ask on a regular basis. Because when you say North Omaha, well, what does that mean? Northern Omaha geographically, but socially, it has a lot of different contexts and connotations. Depending on who you're talking to in different parts of Omaha, people are going to respond in certain ways and have their own affiliation with it. And I think what's really important about Noise, with North Omaha being in our name, is that we are as flexible and as dynamic as people's perceptions or definitions of North Omaha are. And that within our work, we are constantly exploring what that means. In order to explore that, you have to talk to people and ask them, what does that mean? And so I love this question because it's so simple, but it has gleaned very dynamic results and responses from people to their interpretation. And the Let's Make Noise is like, let's make North Omaha information support everyone, having a very clear way of saying that and being professing it and saying it as a statement or as a demand or command rather than like, maybe we will. Sweet. So community engaged journalism is talk to people, ask for their input. And I love this because, so for example, Jesse Hardman and Burgess Brown from the Listening Post served as mentors with Noise and still are, but definitely within the first year or so of our formation. And both of them are rooted in this community of listening and response. It's I am not the journalist that has all of the tools and all of the answers. I'm really someone who like has a baseline of knowledge and may have some strong facilitation skills and abilities, but ultimately I need to know what you need so that I can provide that for you. We are a service industry. So questions like, how do you get your news? How would you like to receive it? What would you like to know more about? I've also been trying to avoid news. So I just like, where do you hear about stuff? For a very explicit reason. People have their own connotations of what news means. And honestly, what we're really wanting to know is, where do you get your information? Like, where do you just learn about anything? Because if you hear about most of your stuff just from, people, then that's good to know. That word of mouth is really important for you and to you. And then that helps us really have a deeper understanding of, okay, that means we need to find more people in the community that have a verbal influence so that they can better communicate with our community. And then so we'll serve as the information aggregate, but then we need to find ambassadors or various point people to help disseminate that information. And that's something that we're always building within the community aspect of what we do. How would you like to receive it? There are so many ways that we can distribute information that are available to us, social media, our website, text alerts, email newsletters, radio, podcasts, and print, of course, print. And so and more, literally just word of mouth, going up to people and saying, hey, this is what's going on. And so when you ask someone, how would you like to receive your information? There's something really special about that, because very rarely are people asked how they would like to receive something. It's usually chosen and then that's how it's delivered. And then someone's like, well, we tried doing it that way. But if that's not how your community communicates, then that is far more difficult to be able to truly provide them the information that they said that they wanted. And then what would you like to know more about? I like asking that question because it's something that, again, people don't get asked very often. And with the end goal being, I'm working to make sure that you receive that information. And when you tell me what you want to know more about, I'm going to seek that so I can share that with you. And there's something like really personal and really wonderful about having that opportunity to be able to respond that way. And ultimately, something that we've been talking a lot about within our group is, invite community members to share their stories, and just hand over the mic. Because once you do that, then it enables people to become contributors and to participate in what we call an act of journalism. That your story is significant because it is yours and you're telling it. And Noise, we are a platform for which you are able to say what is happening to you, what's relevant to you, and share that directly with people. And that is ultimately what our goal and what is our future of sustainability is. If we're talking about storytelling, the future of storytelling, we honestly have to continue to cultivate new storytellers. And a huge way we're able to do that is through engaging our community, asking them these questions, and then once they see it transformed and made present on a platform and see how it can be shared, then there is a level of curiosity as well as like, whoa, that's really effective. How can I be more a part of that? And so honestly, I'm the only one on our team that has a journalism degree. Most of the team comes from various experiences within the journalism and content creation fields. And others are just like really avid fans of civics or community or cultural development, and are looking for ways to meaningfully translate that and purposefully translate that into their community. I tell people all the time, I'm so glad I went to JMC. I highly recommend, if it's something you're interested in, go, because it's an amazing crew, but you don't have to in order to participate, in order to be an effective journalist. And because we have technology available to us in the ways that we do, honestly, what I tell people is like, tweet. Because if you can convey a message concisely, and add an image or a video or share a link that helps provide more context, and you do 5 to 6 tweets, that's 1 to 2 paragraphs of an article. Like these simple elements can translate into the conventional elements of journalism that we see, and also makes it more engaging, makes it more interactive, and ultimately some more accessible for people. Especially when we're working with young people who are digital natives in a lot of ways, and you're saying like, hey, like produce a long form article, but you're like, that's not how I engage with media. So we think about like, well, how can we work with you in a space that you are familiar with, and as well as make it accessible and rooted in journalistic traditions that also are accessible to older generations and other people who consume media differently. Let's see here. And I'm going to go through a few images of Noise, and many of these are taken by local Black photographers or myself or some of our team members, and they kind of show what Noise has come to look like over the last few years. This was during our 1-year anniversary in 2019, after we published our third print edition with the Omaha Star. So if you look closely, you see people holding a newspaper. Noise collaborated with the Omaha Star to print 3 6-page newsprint inserts that came inside the Omaha Star and were distributed to all their subscribers. And then we also got separate print editions that we were able to hand distribute and pass out. These 6 pages were, this was a project of mine because I love designing and I love the tactile of print. And something that I was talking about was like, you know, people don't really engage with print because it's kind of predictable. Very rarely is there anything like, if you've seen a newspaper, you've seen them all kind of thing. And I really wanted to take a different approach to that and really put a design first and art first approach. And so all of our inserts started on one side have an illustration that I illustrated that tied to a theme that theme was the through line articles and things talked about within there. What was really effective about this particular method was, one, it went to all the Omaha Star subscribers. And then 2, we had something in the flesh that we could give directly to people. So especially when we were first forming and we're like, oh, we're Noise, we're news. And they're like, I mean, what is sure? And then we're like, here's a newspaper with like a literal description of who we are, what we do, why we do it, examples of it, stories, content. And then if you fold out the newspaper on the backside, there is a illustration by Black artist. And we specifically did that, one, to encourage and incorporate art, as well as to support local artists. And then even if you couldn't read or didn't want to read any of the articles in the whole newspaper, you had an interesting image to hold on to. And so then it makes the print more evergreen and something that lasts longer. This was a shoot I did with High Omaha, who has now become one of our collaborative partners. We actually worked together on a podcast called Melee News. Andre Sessions, he's a local Black photographer who we'd asked to, if we could share his images and if he would write a short photo essay. This was like early quarantine back in like March, April, and he took images of Omaha and just kind of talked about what it felt like to be present in these spaces. This is in my neighborhood. This is something I took, but I wanted to share this because it's an example of, I think, like the contrast between the two. It kind of really embodies all the things that are happening in Omaha, in North Omaha very specifically. The church on my left is a church that's been in the community for a very, very long time, and North Omaha is full of churches. And then right next to it, you have it's not a bulldozer, but a large machine. He was actually out doing something. He wasn't tearing anything down. But what we are seeing in North Omaha is a future of new development that is led by a lot of, by the city and a lot of philanthropic efforts. And you have people in the community really uneasy about it because they're like, well, how are we a part of that conversation? And that's really something that Noise really tries to focus on, is like, how do we make sure that we're learning what's happening and be able to disseminate that and have people feel they are able to be active participants in the future of our community. This is a photo of Ernie Chambers and Brigitte McQueen-Shue of the Union, and Stephen Abraham and Tim Clark, actually. So these are all like 4 individuals who are very prominent in North Omaha, who have been very strong advocates for the community. Obviously, Ernie Chambers has been the longest serving senator in the state legislature, and his last day is on Friday, ever. And this was this photo was actually taken in front of the Union when there was an installation by Vanessa German last year. That she incorporated a poem that had a story where someone had used the N-word, and so it was directly on it was in that story, and it was on the glass, and it was present, and there was a lot of feedback, and people were like, what is this? Why is this present? And what was really powerful about that moment, about that time, was here was art and writing, journalism, storytelling at the center of a contentious dialogue that brought people out of their homes to say, this is what I think my community should be. This is what I think our community should look like. These are the words that I think our community should be seeing. Whether you agree with it or not, or the context, it was really about, like, you had 50 people on the corner standing in front of this building talking back and I think this, and for the first time I had seen, like, oh, this is what happens when you put the creative energy forward and you put words into space, and then you ask people, and they start to really communicate. And there's something really beautiful about this moment. These are current and former partners of ours. We've worked with the Omaha Star for a long time. We're doing a little more digital focus now, so we haven't done our print since last year, but we are currently in development of a Black civil rights history timeline for Omaha. So looking at the history of Omaha that we're currently developing as far as print, and then the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation, 101.3 Mind and Spare, and they were one of our partners in 2018. And we are in talks right now of how we can redistribute our Melee podcast on the airwaves there. This was the 80th celebration of the Omaha Star. So if you do not know what the Omaha Star is, I've kind of referenced a lot. It is the oldest running Black-owned newspaper found by a woman in the country. So, and it still remains Black-owned, and is still in print today. And Mildred Brown founded the Star in 1938. Was committed to serving the community and sharing good news about what's happening, especially because the Omaha Bee and the World Herald and other commercials at that time still in our mostly white run. I mean, the Bee doesn't exist anymore. And there was very little, like, personal context to the community. There are very few, if any, Black journalists or journalists of color that are within our prominent news stations. And many of them, if they are not from Omaha. For example, we just lost Sydney Gray, who is amazing from KMTV Channel 3, but she's not from Omaha. Yet she was one of the only reporters coming consistently here to North Omaha to report on communities of color and the things that were happening here. And so, but she wanted to go back home to her back to her community and go back to work for her news station there. And, like, that's wonderful. But where is our future crop of journalists coming from? And that's something that Noise really works to do, is like, well, if we recognize that there is a lot of access, well, there is a lack of access, how can we as an information organization, as we're producing news, also connect with young people and others to say, like, hey, you are a storyteller because you have stories, you have a story to tell, and here are the many ways that you can do that. And then, you can share ethics and copy editing and writing and those types of things to help shape and form those things. But ultimately, you need the people who have the relationships to cultivate that. This is something that we started in 2018 and into 2019. We've been doing a little less of because of COVID, but something that we're really excited to bring back this fall is what we're calling Power Hour Community Newsroom. It's modeled after one of our cohort members. So Noise is a part of the American Journalism Project, which is a national effort to help civic and news organizations develop new models and sustainable models of journalism. And City Bureau is based out of Chicago. They're a few years older than us, but they have a very similar scrappy upbringing to us. And what I love about their public newsroom model is that what they do is every Thursday, they have a presentation, and then they invite people from the community to come. And so there'll be someone who presents, and then the other half of the meeting just responding to that subject matter, or talking to the reporters and the contributors for City Bureau to develop leads and stories, relationships, share information about events, those types of things. This kind of convening is so necessary when you're trying to develop an information ecosystem. Because everything is so digital, it's really important to be able to have those physical environments that people are able to interact with that information. Last night actually was one of our first public events that we were able to help be a part of at Culture House. It's Understanding the City Budget. Tonight is the city budget hearing, public comment at 6:30 p.m. at City Hall. And the budget is really big and complicated. And so Noise, we provide the live stream and ask questions from Zoom and things, and then recorded it. So I'm cutting some of those videos right after this to get them out and shared so people can brief themselves. But it's an example of get people into the room, have people who are knowledgeable about the subject matter, ask questions, and then disseminate that information, and then use that very same information to inform our reporting. This is a version of our paper that was done a few years ago. These are a couple of our team members from a few years ago now. I'm like, oh, they look so young when it was just like only 2 years ago. It's Ashley Salem, who is one of our contributors and she has a beautiful voice. And so we work with her in a series called Adjusting, where she talks to community members and various people just about like, how are you adjusting to the change of the world? And then Luis Jimenez, who serves as our civic director, going to City Hall and learning about the local municipal legislative processes, and then do story reporting with that. This is an example of a story we did back in 2018, covering the Juvenile Justice Detention Center that is to be constructed in downtown Omaha, and just following the money, following that process, talking to Pastor Cavett, who's a pastor at North Omaha, about like, you know, is this something that we need as a community, and how do we, you know, so this was like a long investigative piece where we spent a lot of time looking at original documents, budgets, citing, citing meetings, bringing in quotes. There was a lot of work there. And I love this kind of journalism. It's just really intensive. So something that we're trying to do as an organization is how do we get the resources and dedicate the time for more of this investigative reporting. This is kind of what our homepage looks like right now. Currently we have we have an intern who is a senior in high school, going to be starting next week. So she wrote her perspective about what it means to move to virtual learning. Against the Current is a series that we've been curating where we're following the social uprisings and unrest and civil rights movements that are happening here in Omaha as we speak. And then, Do Masks Matter answers of Dr. John Lowe. So we have a resources section where we're more focusing on like asking questions and providing direct, just like more information, less storytelling. Our news is more of the storytelling piece, and the profiles are more like highlights of specific people. This is our YouTube channel. So if you want to like find out more about things, you can check out our YouTube channel. We'll have those videos from last night's Understanding the City Budget available. And North Omaha Votes Matter, North Omaha Matters, and we're present. And Black Votes Matter, Institute of Community Engagement by Preston, headed by Preston Love, is our fiscal sponsor. So because of their 501c3, we're able to exist, and we receive donations through there, and that's how people can support us. Sweet, so I'm gonna stop the share, and I'm gonna stop talking about that and love to hear questions from you guys. Oh, sorry, I had my speaker off if someone was speaking to me.
Dewan, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I have a question about like when you're engaging with your subjects, what are some of the ways that you establish trust with them to get them to open up to you and get comfortable talking to you about what can sometimes be difficult topics?
I think that's a great question. there are certain things that I don't always have control over, but something I really try to do is smile and say like, how are you? And start with that, we're humans connecting first. I think that's really important when doing kind of with any approach is like, I'm a person here to receive your story. I think something that also is to my personal advantage is that like I'm from the community that we are talking about. And so I think having that like that camaraderie and that like, I know the context, I'm familiar with the context that we're in. Am I familiar with every part of it? No. And we all have different experiences of it, but I think having that like, that shared understanding of like, we're from the same community, we have a shared experience really does provide some of that. And if you don't have that shared experience, acknowledging that, I think that's also really important. People really appreciate honesty and direction and being like, here's what I'm trying to do, here's what I know I don't have, and here's what I think the outcome could be. What are your thoughts on that? And I think people really love like, whoa, you laid out everything that you know that you have and don't have. You show me your cards, I'll be more likely to show you mine.
That's great. We had a question come in for you. Loving the idea of the Power Hour. Mm-hmm. How do you promote those events, and what has attendance been like? Probably better before COVID, obviously, than now, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Certainly. Yes. So with Power Hour, when we started that, we worked with Mind and Soul 101.3, and we did a radio spot with them, just being like, hey, Power Hour. We were doing like every Thursday at Scooters on 30th and Ames for the first time we launched it. And we were doing that. We're like, we're going to do that all summer from May through the beginning of August. And so we were just like consistent. We didn't have a ton of people show up, but when people did show up, it was important that we were there. And so I think that's also what it is like consistency is really helpful. Something that we are really looking forward to doing moving forward is like doing direct mailings to communities, so every door direct to specific zip codes and areas that we might be hosting these events, and better utilizing our social media. And since we have a much larger following now, I think we'll have a much larger impact when we start to host more events. Before it was really kind of like me and a few others bootstrapping it, and we still are and still have that mentality, but there's much more of a team now that is able to contribute and to help flesh that out. And so yeah, definitely we did the radio, we had social media posts, we did an insert in the Omaha Star, and then we also like sent direct messages to people that we think would have like hey, that we think we appreciate this. Leverage those relationships. That's going to be the crux of my whole statement is like leverage your relationships, and if you don't have them, seek them out. I think that's like, if you're trying to engage a community and you, especially like say you're doing PR for an organization and you're like, oh, we really need to connect to these communities that are underrepresented. If you don't have direct relationships personally, as a person who's trying to lead that PR effort, you need to form those. And people within your organization need to form those. It's one thing to get an outside study that tells you this is how those people operate. It's another thing to have a direct relationship to be like, hey, this is what we're doing. Is this even effective? Here's some data that we have. Is this even true? Like, can you provide any like real context for it? And when you have that, that makes it so much more realistic. And then you'll have people built into your network who are willing to help you do it. Because it's not always really about like how many people are being reached and affected. It's really about the meaning and the impact of that, of the information and their interaction with it. And if it's coming from someone they trust and it's utilizing language and images and things that were truly informed by their experience because you talked to someone about that experience, then it's so much more likely to resonate and be present with people.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
have a question. What do you see as the future for Noise? Let's say, what's your next project that you're working on or the next few years?
Certainly. That's a great question. So with Noise, we're in the process right now of, I'm the founder director, but I'm really trying to find ways to disperse our work and really and have more of a horizontal management and power structure. And so currently we're in the process of developing what that looks like. I say that we have 4 core pillars. It's like civics, community, culture, content, or news. Those pillars are what we're using to translate into who will ultimately have directors of each pillar. That can then lead programming as well as be the information director for that particular aspect that then translates into what our content it looks like. So having a content director is a person who's thinking about all the mediums, and then to have people who are focused in civics, community, and culture to be like, hey, we need to pay attention to this event. Hey, this is what's happening in the civic world. Hey, this is here's what I'm hearing in the community. We need to make sure that's translated into our content. Those pillars also allow us to kind of experiment more programmatically. For example, with civics, I'm really interested in, again, a City Bureau model of their Documenters program, which is essentially engaging people and giving them a one-on-one on here's what our public bodies look like, here's how they operate, and then here's how you can take notes and help us keep tabs on all of these, because we do have city council and county commissioners, but the city of Omaha has a number of public commissions and boards, as well as many other offices that are like the Office of the Comptroller and MUD and OPPD and Metro Transit Board and those types of things, which a lot of decisions get made there, and all of them have to do with our tax dollars, and we elect most of the people. But we don't, there's very few places that you can go and find that information. You'd have to go to each individual website, go into their individual archive and follow up to that. So with the Documenters program, we're in the early stages of that, talking to City Bureau about their formatting and structure and how they've built sustainability. And then working here locally to just find a civic partner. One of them is Heartland Worker Center, and how can we work together to tap into our communities and provide a meaningful way of engaging with the civic space that also helps us develop civic news content. With community, we're really interested in bringing back the power hours, as well as doing more direct engagements, hosting fun events, having conversations, doing door knocking and saying hey, we're present, we're here. And then culture is really important in the way that if you're trying to affect change long term, it needs to become a part of the culture. And we really want news and information sharing to become a part of the culture, not apart from or an observation of. And so working with a place like Culture House, led by Marcy Yates, there are open mic nights. There is a really incredible community of artists that are there. There's a lot of attention as far as the civil rights movements happening here, and organizing and activism, and how do we take these things that we know about and turn them into long-term sustainable forms of our culture. And then ultimately, how do those things translate into content and feed into each other and create a feedback loop in an ecosystem that can sustain itself. So that's really where we are right now, bringing on this, formalizing that structure, bringing on directors for it. We really want to find more ways to engage young people in journalism. So we have 2 interns this summer who have joined us, one from North High School and another who's from Omaha but goes to Northwestern's School of Journalism. And working with them has been a joy. They're so refreshing, and they bring in whole new perspectives, and we're able to share our information and our experience. And so far that's been a real joy. And so moving forward, we're interested in talking to North Omaha area high schools to see how we can have some kind of liaison program, or just like, can we come talk to your journalism students or any of your students in general about the future of journalism? Because I think when we say journalism, people are like articles and newspapers, but honestly, like it's so different now. And, just in my journalism education, the multimedia approach is so important, and be able to find as many ways to communicate. And I think now more than ever, journalism is accessible and ready for new faces and new blood and new approaches, because a metaphor I use is like, we're on a sinking ship trying to build a solar powered airplane. like the ways of the past of like those things, but there's so many elements from that ship that are like really strong. So how do we put them into the plane? Like, how do we take them with us? What are the supplies that we carry forth to ultimately continue?
Okay, so we have a couple questions. Leanne wanted to know, what has been your favorite aspect or specific impact of Noise thus far?
I love that question. It's a question we get a lot too, especially when we're responding to grants and like having conversations like, what is your impact? Something that really sticks with me is when people say like, I saw myself in that, or I know that person, or I'm so glad, thank you for this coverage. And the simple thank yous are really great, but like they're huge because, especially on a local context, like we're not some national corporation that's off somewhere that is unaccountable and unaffected by any of the coverage that's happening here. Like literally the stuff that we're talking about directly affects us. And we likely have some type of relationship with the subjects, just because it's Omaha, or with the subject matter. And so that like level of accountability, when people see something and they're like, hey, that needs to change, people feel comfortable and confident enough to reach out to us and say, hey, this is something I noticed. Here's something that should be followed. I have some input on that. And it really becomes like a dialogue. And I feel like just even being able to be in the place to initiate that is so impactful. The future of journalism is two-way communication. Social media allows that and enables that for us to have like really dynamic conversations and engage with our media and our content in a different way. And people expect that of journalism. That's why so many journalists are on Twitter now. And like, you have to be in a lot of ways. So I'd say like being able to have dialogue with our audience is one of the most impactful, and something that we're like always trying to find more ways to develop and open up.
Wonderful. Faz had a question. Faz, I'll let you unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, that's just me not clicking the wrong button. I'm sorry.
Okay, never mind. You're good then.
You already answered a question
okay,
I had
great.
earlier. Thank you.
Awesome, wonderful. So we had another question for you, Dewan. It seems that there are a lot of local podcasts and publications working to tell the untold stories of Omaha. How have you connected with other organizations on these efforts? And do you feel that these duplicate efforts are strengthening or watering down the impact of these stories?
That's a great question. So, for example, when we started working in like the broadcast space, we started with something called the Noise Report, and we were doing collaboration with 101 Mind and Soul 101.3, and that was just on Mind and Soul. And then we like took a break from that because it was really intense, and we're doing these other things and recalibrating. Then we came back to do the Noise Report podcast. It was much longer form. We still have episodes of that available if that's something you're interested in. But we ultimately stepped away from that due to COVID and like getting together, but then also just like, again, it was very resource intensive. Now we work in collaboration with Figure Podcasts, Hi Omaha, and Noise to develop what is called Melee News, Melee Community News. And I feel like this has been one of our most successful forays because we generally have a team to do it now. And so that like kind of collaboration and partnership, because Hi Omaha was like, oh, we're going to do a podcast, and Figure Podcast was like, we already do podcasts. And then we were like, we do one too, but we'd love to do more. And well, we don't really have the capacity to do that. And so we're like, well, let's all work together, because then that allows us to really support one another, lend our credibility to each other and our resources, and be able to get stories out in a way that we're, you know, being inclusive and being mindful. And we're like, sweet. So as far as like watering down, I think that like, if you feel compelled to create something and release it, do it. Even if it's like, oh, someone's already doing it. No one's going to do it the way you do, which is really important. And there's always something to be learned from that process. So even if it's not something you sustain long-term, there might be the one time, like one person might listen to your one podcast, but like that happened, and then there was something that could resonate there and have an impact. And so I think as a designer, as an artist who is like, throw it out the wall and see what sticks, I think there's a lot of credibility to that. And there's a lot of validity to that. We're in an ecosystem. So, you know, I don't tell that tree to stop growing because this tree wants to grow. We do it together. And the more roots that are present, the more sustainable our resources, the more shade we have, the more of a healthy ecosystem that we have. So I think that's also really important, is like, it can be easy to shape things in a competitive format and be like, well, I'm fighting for the same, but as a person who consumes media, I listen to all kinds of things and in different capacities. And so like, I don't feel like I'm fighting for, so, you know, I think that's also really important. So, you know, collaboration right now with the Melee podcast, with the Melee News, we reached back out to Mind and Soul, who was our partner in the past, like, hey, would you guys be interested in this? Or are there some other things that we could do together that are in that vein? And they're like, yeah, so like, let's continue those conversations. And our current interim news director, Emily Chen Newton, she worked at NPR, our KOS Omaha, and came to work with Noise because she's like, I love this style and I want to be able to lend my support in audio and broadcast and journalism and lend it toward this community voice and how we can shape that. And she's been really impactful in helping us think differently and broader. And one of our most recent episodes of Melee, if you Melee News, anywhere you get your podcasts, you can find the Protesters Diary, the Farm Street Bridge, and that is a collection of audio diaries from people who were arrested on July 25th, following a protest in support, in solidarity of Portland and justice for James Scurlock. And just listening to that and literally just handing over the mic and having a platform available and asking people to share their direct experiences, and then listening to those experiences and then kind of connecting the dots. And like, each time you hear someone's story, you hear them reference different parts of each other, and ultimately leaving being like, whoa, something's got to change. Like, whether you agree with what they were doing and who was doing what in what way, something's got to be different. And I just love that form of storytelling, and it's because of the collaborative nature of our team and the many perspectives that we had available was what made that even possible.
Yes, if you haven't listened to that, I would highly recommend it. It was very, very well done. Okay, so we just have a couple more questions. Ellie wanted to know, what are 2 to 3 ways our community can be more impactful together? Ways our media and places like Noise can collaborate?
That's a great question. Something that as a designer, someone who has access to design tools, who has been familiar with design thinking, I would say offering those kinds of services to small emerging businesses, to organizations, or even just offering sessions to people to help them get into that mindset. Design thinking and the whole concept is something that's really informed my process, and something that I try to implement in every aspect of what we do. assess and iterate and develop and experiment and collaborate, like all the words that we love to use within the PR advertising, marketing, design world, I think really need to get out of our bubbles and into the everyday vernacular and vocabulary, because they are so useful. And all of it is rooted in imagination. All of it is rooted in like trying and experimentation. And I think like that is so important. You know, it's the fun scientific theory. I love scientific theory, but it's something that's a little more like hands-on, and it can be is a little more free-flowing, and doesn't have to be as rigid. And I think people really need that. So if you're able to offer a workshop in photography, if you're able to you know, offer any, you know, well-designed resources that help people get familiar with the vocabulary around design thinking, if you are a PR firm that does a lot of like social impact work, show people what your process looks like and how you get there. I think folks are really curious about that and would love to like understand how the media around us is made. And something I really love doing with Noise, and why I kind of started the presentation with like, here's our fonts and here's our design choices, and like, here are our inspirations, because people want to see. I love behind the scenes. I miss making the video on MTV, because you see the end product, but like, how is it made? I want to know. And I think now we have the opportunity to show people how journalism, how media, how any of our content is developed. And when we are able to show that to our communities and to people, then we're more likely to get those same people involved in the creation and the formation of that content, which then makes it that much more sustainable and far-reaching.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're coming up on time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. The last question we'll put forth is from John. Absolutely love your enthusiasm, and also recognize that North Omaha needs a voice in Omaha. How can we as PRSA members help you?
I'm going to go back to that, like, hey, you have tools, you have a network, you have resources, you have an audiences that may not be paying attention specifically to this part of town. So I'd say, one, come visit, drive through, go for a walk, go to our parks. We have all these public parks. We have historic areas. Just come be present. I think is a really huge part of that. Do some research. North Omaha History, curated by Adam Fletcher Sass, is an incredible resource. The Great Plains Black History Museum, Eric Ewing, is open, and he's right off North 24th Street, so you can talk to him. The Union for Contemporary Art is still closed, but they do have a lot of online resources, and their Undesigned, the Red Line Gallery exhibition, there is a digital version, I believe, that is available for that. So get familiar with the history of Omaha. Something that's really transformed has really transformed me in my approach to this work is getting familiar with our context. A friend and I were having a great conversation last night, and we were just like, be where you are. Because it can be really easy to try to want to be somewhere else, but like be as in yourself. Where are you? What's the context? Who am I? What is my relationship to that? And then is this something that I am presently doing? Is this something I want to do? Is this something I like doing at all? And in asking those questions. And then like someone said to me, be where you are most powerful, and stand in that. I think it can be easy to try to be in every which place, and try to, I want to change the world, but stand where you are, be where you are most powerful, and have the impact. And so I say, like, learn the history of Omaha, the many histories of Omaha, build those relationships personally without a professional objective, I think is really important, that you're doing it authentically and not always to have this professional benefit so that your PR campaign in the fall is going to be more successful. If that prompted you, great, but like make sure that investment is a real human connection. And then you offer your services, as you're doing your research and looking into businesses or entities, say like, hey, I noticed that, your SEO isn't very strong, or like you might need some new graphics, or your copy could be a bit stronger. How can I do this? Is there a way that I can help support you? And, I can do a pro bono, or here's a rate that is accessible for us. Let's work it out, because so many of the other organizations in other parts of the city have staff members for that, have the capital that a legacy of segregation has enabled them to have. And that's not necessarily to their fault, but it is something that is present. And so when we look at other communities that may not have the same, well-branded design and like well-executed all these things, is because you have to have capital for that. You have to have academic access to that, which historically has not been accessible. So as people who have those tools and who have these abilities, let's extend that to people and say, how can I help?
Well said. Thank you, Dewan.
Yes, of course. It's glad to be here.
You've gotten lots of thank yous and kudos in the chat. So
I
thank
appreciate
you
it.
very much for joining us. We appreciate you being with us today. And as a token of our appreciation, we'll be dropping an Omaha Steaks gift card in the mail to you. So little surprise coming your way.
I appreciate that so much. And yeah, and you guys, you can reach us at Noise Omaha on any of our social media. You can follow me, Dewan21, or at Noise Omaha on Twitter. We also have a text subscription, text Noise to 33222, and I can put that in the chat real quick. So that's where we do we send out occasional text alerts about updates. And yeah, and then you can reach us at any of the social medias. If you have some ideas, suggestions, ways to collaborate in the future, I'll also put my email address in the inbox if you want to reach out directly to me.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you guys all for coming. Before we wrap up, I want to thank our sponsors once more: Woodman Life, Omaha Steaks, Bergman Incentives, Lucas Partners, and Envoy Inc. A special thank you again to MSpace and Lovegren for sponsoring today's program. We hope to see you at our next virtual meeting. That's Tuesday, September 15th, also over the lunch hour, also over Zoom, where we'll be learning about social media ethics and the PR landscape from Gemelyn Griffin. Thank you guys all for participating. Thank you, Dewan. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks.